You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, 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 golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Repent, repent, repent. Thy end is near. TFC hosts a playoff game tonight. Oh, I can't believe it.
It feels weird, right?
Yeah, it does feel weird. And I have Rudi Schuller on the line here from the Sporting News now. It used to be Goal. It's kind of still the same, long story short, but he's with the Sporting News. Rudi, you were there not only on the first day of TFC, but you were also there in part of the Lynx years here in Toronto. So before we get going, how weird is it that you're going to watch a playoff game in Toronto tonight that involves Toronto? Because, of course, we had the MLS Cup in 2010.
It is weird, but I'm not. I don't know. I'm not on the same plane as I see a lot of people are. Like, oh, this is the end of days and whatnot, because we all saw it coming for the past several months. You know, TFC was sitting at the top of the East for a while too. So the concept of a home playoff game wasn't as far fetched as it would have been even a year ago, or even a few months before that. So I think there's been a lot of time to kind of prepare for this. Obviously, I mean, literally, yes. But I mean, even within the context of one season, there's been a lot of time to prepare for this. So, yeah, I think it's time to get over maybe not get over it, but get past the fact that it's the first home playoff game and demand a little bit more from the team.
Yeah, precisely. And we're going to go into that in a minute. But before we do that, there is a bit of breaking news this morning out of Vancouver. I think, in that the Whitecaps have re-upped Carl Robinson. Not so much that they're coming back with him, but that they've re-upped him to 2020. Now, that could just be a severance package they're working out in case they decide to move on. But nonetheless, are you surprised by that news, Rudi, that Carl Robinson has apparently been committed to till 2020? And his assistants, too.
Yes and no. I'm surprised in a general sense, because I don't think the Whitecaps have been a good team for a year and a half, to be quite honest, since the first half of 2015, when they looked like world beaters, and they were maybe the first 2 months of this year, but they weren't that great for the first 2 months of this year either. So if you go back to maybe July of 2015, that's where the skid started, and it just kept going for the Whitecaps. So on a general level, yeah, it just based on historically in the soccer world or even the sporting world, coaches don't usually get that much of a leash. But I have been hearing rumblings about it from over there, so I'm not surprised in that regard, because I have had, been able to kind of process it. And the fact of the matter is, the Whitecaps front office thinks very, very highly of Carl Robinson. He wasn't their first choice when they first hired him, but I think he's done enough in their eyes to obviously give them the reins for the next 4 years, which is it really is unprecedented when you think about it. A team that went from looking like world beaters to missing the playoffs, and then the coach gets a 4-year extension. Hopefully for the West Coasters out there, they're doing the right thing.
Precisely, and we'll examine that in a little more detail in the days ahead. But let's move ahead to the here and now, which is the playoffs, and Toronto FC, as we mentioned off the top, in a more of a joking way. But now let's look at them seriously. Look, what is TFC right now? Are they the team that struggled through that 4-game homestand? Or are they the team that won, got 4 points out of their last 6, including the come from behind result at home and down the road?
I think they're kind of both. To be quite honest, they're still finding their identity. Just because they've had so many players in and out of the lineup over the course of the season. Of course, they know who they are. They know who their big names are. Everyone knows who their big names are. But I don't think they're fully. I don't think they're fully solidified on the back line. Is Eric Zappaletta the guy to go next to Drew Moore? Is it or is it Nick Hagelin? I know that's a question mark. Is Armando Cooper a starter, or is it Marky Delgado? So I think there's a couple of things that still need to be worked out. For the most part, the team knows who they are, and the league knows who they are. And what they are is a very good MLS team, a very dangerous MLS team that, for the most part, has improved immensely over this year compared to last. So I think defensively, they still have some issues they need to work out. Especially, Clint Irwin hasn't looked at his best since coming back, and that's to be expected since he was off for so long. But he is a very, very good goalkeeper, and the players in front of him haven't looked at their best either. So I think all they're hoping for now is that it all comes together very quickly. And to TFC's fortune, they have a lot of players that have been there and done that. Not even in terms of just MLS, but all over the world. We've had players at World Cups and big name players on national teams all over the CONCACAF. So these are players that aren't going to be overawed by the occasion, like maybe some of them were last year. And if they're asking, if their management is asking them to get things together quickly, I think this is a group that can do that just based on their makeup.
You mentioned we all know who the big names are: Giovinco, Altidore, Bradley. How important is their performance tonight in a one-off game, Rudi, to Toronto to assure themselves a trip to New York?
Extremely important. Extremely important. We've seen to varying degrees some of those big names not perform. A game here, a game there, kind of thing. I think Michael Bradley had his worst game in a TFC uniform against Montreal, to be quite honest. And then against Chicago, he came back and did a good job. We saw Sebastian Giovinco shake off the rust a little bit when he came back from his injury. And of course, we've seen Josie Altidore go through spells where he looked, nothing like what he looks now over the past 2 months, where he looks like the best striker in MLS. So I think all three of them need to be performing because, as you mentioned, it is a one-off. There's no room for error. But I think against a Philadelphia team that is very forgiving in the back line, let's just put it that way. I think this is it's almost a good thing that they're playing this extra game so they can kind of get everything on the same page, get them all on the same page, and get them all together. Because if and when they get past Philadelphia, and I think they should, a much tougher test waits for them in New York City FC.
In the history of Canadian soccer teams in Major League Soccer in the playoff, you kind of have to lose your first go around to learn to win the next time around. Do you think it's the next time around right now? Is it Toronto's year to at least make it to the semifinal of the conference, or even further, depending on how the form is, how Giovinco performs, especially? What's your thought on the overall, the game tonight? Is it for almost guarantee, and how deep can this team go?
This team can go as deep as they can go. I think the only team that's going to really, 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 well, I'm not gonna, but the only thing that really has given TFC any kind of cause for concern in the Eastern Conference is New York Red Bulls. Yes, NYCFC has kind of been Toronto's boogie team in that I don't think TFC's actually ever beaten them, but things are different in the playoffs, and the old cliche is anything can happen when you start playing, right? And if you look at a team that's as balanced as TFC is now, especially compared to last year, where there were big holes. Now there's still some question marks, as I mentioned off the top, but the team is a lot more balanced. I don't see why this team can't be considered a legitimate MLS Cup contender, and this is exactly where they wanted to be, and this is exactly where they should be at this point in this era of Toronto FC. So I don't want to say that they're going to do it because you don't know. Nobody knows because that's just the way the playoffs are. But they have as good a chance as any, in my opinion.
It's hard to be a mind reader, obviously, but when I saw Giovinco on Sunday against Chicago, particularly that second goal, which might have been one of the most incredible pieces of skill I've ever seen up close in my life, the way he played that ball off the touchline. But when I saw that, I was convinced that he's motivated and ready to go. Did you share that thought that Giovinco is up for this, that he wants to prove that he can win an MLS Cup championship?
Absolutely. I said that to someone up in the press box on maybe not during that same play, but just during the game. That he's back. He was playing with the fire that we saw him play. And I mean that literally and figuratively because he was playing against the fire, but he was playing with that fire in his belly that we saw earlier in the year, and that we saw even late last year. When he flew off when he flew out of Rome and scored later that night. One of the best goals anybody has seen in MLS. So he definitely wants to succeed. He's a guy who doesn't want to go out on the same note that they went last year. And I think that kind of is the prevailing thought around the whole team. But as Sebastian Giovinco goes, of course TFC goes, and I don't think there's any worry that he's motivated because that game on Sunday showed that he was.
Yeah, you mentioned a moment ago the concern for most TFC fans has to be the goals allowed, and particularly Zavaleta, who's had a very strong season up until he got burnt a few weeks ago, and he hasn't really fully recovered. Is it really that simple in terms of fixing the back line to get either Zavaleta or Hagelin or whoever's standing beside Drew Moore to get their confidence back up so that they can just fill that role in the same level that they did earlier, or is there something else going on there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, both of those guys are relatively young for center backs, right? And especially Zavaleta, who hasn't really played as a center back his entire life. He was originally a striker, if I'm not mistaken. So who was converted in college. So he's only been a center back for 4 or 5 years of his soccer playing career. So that a lot of those little mistakes you can get away with as a striker, because if you give the ball up and the opponents have, it doesn't really matter. You still got 10 guys behind you that can help out. But if you give away those cheap giveaways on the back line, then basically you're giving Bradley Wright Phillips, for example, a guy, an opportunity to just go in and chip the keeper, and we saw that happen against the New York Red Bulls. So it's tough to say, because I think that both of them are experienced enough now that I don't think they should be treated with the kid gloves, but at the same time, neither of them have that much experience that they should be treated too much like veterans. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where I think that maybe they need to follow Drew Moore's lead a little bit more, whether it's verbally or just watching him play. But unfortunately, this is kind of a trial by fire, because those are the two guys they've got. They've got Josh Williams as well too, but I don't think Greg Vanny sees him as the guy next to Drew Moore for whatever reason. He's a little bit more experienced than those other two guys I mentioned, but from what we've seen, it's either Hagelin or Zavaleta, and you take the good with the bad with both of them. And honestly, as you mentioned before, I think for both of them, there's been more good than bad. And now, the cliche is that when it gets down to crunch time, are they going to be able to handle it? Well, I guess we'll find out, right?
I'm going to ask Rudi to put yourself in the shoes of a scout of the Philadelphia Union. What does the Union need to do to beat TFC tonight?
Well, they're going to try to go. They're going to try to hit them on the counterattack. We've seen TFC not handle the counterattack very well against teams that can hit quickly on the counter. Because there's not a whole lot of speed in the middle of the park for TFC. So a lot of the balls over the top, I think, kind of hurt Toronto's, and it's been that way since Greg Vanny's been in charge. He prefers the bigger, stronger center backs opposed to guys who have speed to burn. He puts those guys on the wings, which is it's a traditional way of going about things, but there's not a whole lot of athleticism in the middle, especially if Nick Hagelin's not playing. So there are opportunities to catch them on the break, especially when guys like Justin Morrow and Stephen Beitashour are bombing up and down those wings. That's where you want to hit them if you're the Philadelphia Union. Is you can hit them down the middle, but you can also use your wingers to kind of chase down the ball and then switch in a quick ball into the middle to if it's the Union, CJ Sapong, whoever they're going to be starting. I think that's the way they're going to be looking at things. And even if you look at the way Philadelphia played the last game at BMO, that's how they got their goal. Alejandro Bedoya just walked right down and chipped the keeper, and he had no pressure on him. So I think it all depends on the middle of the park and how they're defending, and of course that also depends on how Michael Bradley's feeling as well too. Because if he decides to push forward, then that leaves a giant gap in front of those center backs as well, which kind of exacerbates the problem. So I think that's the way you want to hit TFC, because they're not gonna be able to run and gun with them. Philadelphia is not that kind of team that can just punch for punch. It's just not the way it's going to go. You're not going to do that against Josie Altidore and Sebastian Giovinco. And I don't think they're defensively strong enough to try to park the bus and do that thing. So I think that they're going to have to do that a little bit, but like the parking the bus. But they're going to look to counter quickly and maybe put some kind of a high press on where they can cause turnovers in the back, the way we talked about with Eric Zappaletta or Nick Hagelin. They're going to focus on whoever is standing next to Drew Moore and try to get that person to cough up the ball and maybe create a chance or two that way.
Obviously, we have the DPs, but what is Toronto's advantage tonight in the game?
Well, I mean, obviously the home field is a big advantage. I know BMO hasn't been as kind to TFC as it has been in previous years, but it still is. I think the occasion will help TFC if they can get past the first 5-10 minutes without completely falling apart. But other than that, there's just so much experience and guile all throughout the team. I mentioned the two fullbacks, Justin Morrow and Stephen Beitashour. Justin Morrow especially loves to bomb up and down that left side and whipping across or even going for goal himself. He's the highest scoring defender in the league with 5 goals, and I think he also has 4 assists as well. So he's a legitimate goal threat. And then you've got, as I mentioned, Michael Bradley, who loves to push up. If he's not trying to ping a 60-yard pass to either of the two front men, he's trying to run through the whole team himself. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But he loves to take shots from outside as well. And then you've got Armando Cooper, who's come in and done a great job. He brings a little bit more trickiness. And I think just a little bit a different dimension to what the rest of the team has. A little bit more unpredictability, just like Sebastian Jovinko shows. With the willingness to take players on and try shots from anywhere and try to do things that most players wouldn't even think of. I think that's a little bit of what Armando Cooper brings, and he's a great two-way player. And then you've got Jonathan Osorio, who scored one of the greatest goals for TFC the other night. So if he can get going, then it takes pressure off the two guys up top. So there's a lot of weapons on TFC. It all depends on how they're feeling on the night. That's been the case, I think, the entire year. But I think the fact that there's just so many weapons that one or two guys can have a night off, and I think it'll be okay, especially against a Philadelphia team that hasn't looked good at all over the past 2 months.
When Osorio scored that goal, I half expected him to rip his jersey off with a "Screw You" floral written under it or something. It was don't quite know where that came from, but at any rate, Rudi, I don't necessarily believe teams are cursed, but maybe I'm wrong. And TFC certainly would be one of those teams that you would look at and go, maybe they're cursed. Maybe there was some kind of bad deal done at some point with some bad person. But what happens tonight if TFC does manage to lose this game? I know the fans are going to lose their mind, and that's. Fans are good fans, and that's understandable. But in terms of management, will they lose their mind? Will they look to move on from one of the DPs? Do you think that there would be a blow-up if they were to lose this game tonight?
No, I don't think there will be a blow-up. I don't think that's Bill Manning's style. I think regardless, there's going to be some moves in the offseason anyway, just because the way they're pushed up against the cap. And, we're hearing, of course, things about certain designated players having interest and whatnot. So, I think it'll be a slow and steady regardless of what happens against Philadelphia. Obviously, if they get blown out, then things are different. But I don't think Philadelphia is that type of team anyway. If Philadelphia were to win, it'll probably be a fluke late goal or something like that, or one of those counterattacks I keep mentioning. I don't think it's going to be anything too embarrassing in terms of scoreline if that were to happen. So just looking at the way this current front office operates, and the way Tim Bezbatchenko has built his team, and the way Bill Manning, his history with Real Salt Lake, I don't think you're going to see too much of a blow up just because that's not their MO. I think you're going to see changes regardless of what happens in the postseason anyway. But of course, if the worst case scenario happens against Philadelphia, then I think we'll see a little bit more of that. But I don't think anything's going to be too drastic.
All right, fair enough. Let's turn our attention for the remaining time that we have to the other game tonight, which is RSL v. the Galaxy. The inclination, obviously, is to assume that the Galaxy are just going to flip a switch and suddenly run, deep into this playoffs. However, there's been some questions about that team down the stretch. They really haven't looked that good. And in fact, the only argument you can make that the Galaxy are true contenders to win a championship is the fact that they're the Galaxy. How do you think tonight's going to go in that game, Rudi?
I do think the Galaxy are going to win. I don't think it's going to be any kind of overwhelming display of beautiful soccer or anything like that. They're not going to dominate, I don't think. I think it'll be a 1-0 or a 2-1. And I think it'll actually go into extra time. I think the Galaxy are are struggling to put things together in front of the net. They still don't know how to play with Giovanni Dos Santos and Robbie Keane on the field at the same time. I don't see that. I don't see that all of a sudden changing. The two of them are too similar, and they like to play in the same spots, and they take the ball away from each other, and they take space away from each other, which kind of throws the balance off. So, that being said, they are the more talented of the two teams. They are, of course, the older of the two teams, but that also means that they're most experienced of the two teams. And Bruce Arena knows how to get things done, even if it has to, make the game extremely ugly in front of his own fans. He'll do it, and I think that's what's going to happen against RSL. This RSL team is not the RSL of years past. It's clearly on a downslope, and I don't think they have what it takes to beat this Galaxy team. So I do think it's going to be a close one. RSL could definitely nick one here or there, but I just don't think on overall form and just what we've seen over the past several months that RSL is going to pull it off. I think it's going to be a very close game, but I think that LA will do it.
How impressed were you, Rudi, by Landon Donovan, his comeback, and the way the Galaxy have managed to get a lot of points late in the season to finish third in the Western Conference?
Yeah, Landon Donovan is who he is, right? I mean, there's a reason why the MVP award is named after him. He's arguably the greatest MLS player of all time, and he retired extremely young. So he came back now. He's 34. Which isn't that young anymore, but he's still a good age to do something, especially at his talent level. He's not he hasn't been dominant or anything like that, but he definitely changes that team. So I think it was a smart move by Bruce Arena. It was a desperation move for sure, and they were just lucky that he was willing to do it, because he could have just sat counting his piles of money, which he was planning on doing anyway. With his young family that he just started, but. No, I think he's been good for the team, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him back next year. And if you give him a full year, I think he might be able to bring back some of that old Landon Donovan magic. Now, age is of course just catching up with everyone, and he'd be 35 at that point. But there are still flashes of him there, and in the playoffs, that's all you need. So, never count out Landon Donovan or the LA Galaxy.
Fair enough. And that sort of leads to our final question I have for you today, Rudi, is MLS playoffs rarely go to chalk. So it's unlikely, based on past history, that we will see a Dallas-New York final. I mean, maybe we will, but it seems unlikely. So if you could name one team from the 12 that are still standing that you think might be the Portland Timbers of 2016, who would you name?
DC United. I know that's a fairly obvious answer just based on the form. But I think everyone wrote them off, including myself, wrote them off in July when they just looked like they were an old, tired team that had no answers. And then, they made one or two trades in the window, and that completely rejuvenated them. They got Patrick Mullins, they got Lloyd Sam, and those two players really helped them a lot and gave them a new dynamic, and it kind of reinvigorated the whole team. And they've looked like the best team in MLS over the past 2 months. So. That's a team that on the whole, they didn't look great over the entire course of the season, but they look good enough and dangerous enough and are peaking at the right time that I think they can do that. So yeah, I think I wouldn't say that's too far out of left field just because of the way they've been playing, but if you look at the entire season as a whole, I think it is a bit surprising to see them primed to make a run.
Yeah. That said, do you feel that that one of the two teams that I mentioned off the top are the favorites heading into this playoffs, the New York or Dallas?
Well, I think the Red Bulls will be there in the conference final. It all depends on who they face. I tweeted this out the other day, and I'll say it again. I just feel like everyone picking New York Red Bulls to win MLS Cup, it just feels like everyone was picking TFC to win the Supporters Shield 2 months ago. Right, it's such an obvious thing, and it's the reason why it's an obvious thing. They've been playing such great soccer since they had that horrible start to the season, and they've been arguably the best MLS team over the past 3-4 years if you combine their records. So there's nothing too surprising with them, but that's a good thing. I do think that they'll obviously we got the bye, so then I do think that they'll get past that semifinal round and they'll be there in the conference final. And Red Bull Arena is almost an impossible place to pick up a win anyway, so that'll work to their advantage. But it all depends on who they face in the conference final, whether they can get there or not, because there are some teams that play them better than others within the context of the Eastern Conference. And I think momentum for some of those teams would help a lot more getting past the New York Red Bulls. But I think out of the New York LA dichotomy, I think that New York the Red Bulls rather probably have a better chance of winning the whole thing.
Yeah, so we'll probably see the impact in Sporting Kansas City in the final because this is MLS.
Exactly, yeah.
Rudi, anything you want to promote before we say goodbye?
Of course, we made the switch over to Sporting News now, but we're still operating as Goal on the Sporting News. So we've got a lot of predictions, a lot of MLS stuff going up. We had actually not even just playoff stuff. We had Michael McCall did a good thing on a good little bit on Fraser Aird and his future. That's still up on the site. It's an exclusive interview we had with him, and of course we have our predictions and whatnot that all of our staff, Ivan Scholar staff, and the rest, we all took part in, and we predicted how these games are going to go. So take a look at those and laugh at us for being wrong tomorrow.
All right, Rudi. Thanks as always for your time, and we'll see you down in the stadium tonight.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Oh, Kevin. I can't help you. I mean, look, I am the most, I wouldn't say I'm the most, but I am certainly someone who gravitates towards the logical when I try and evaluate sports, the take the emotion out of it, take the superstition out of it. But as a longtime observer of Toronto sports, as a day one observer of TFC, I can't help but have in the back of my head the worst case scenario. And I think that I'm not alone in that front when it comes to TFC. And I know outside of the TFC bubble, there's a lot of people that are not only thinking that that's possible, but they're kind of hoping it is because it would be kind of funny to them, right, Kevin?
You mean Toronto losing to Philly tonight? Is that the worry?
Yeah, that wouldn't be the concern that many might have. Yeah,
well, it's possible. Or example, they win, but Javinko gets injured.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I said to the show yesterday at the end. That Javinko get hurt in the warm-up. We don't know. You just don't know.
You never know.
I did put a poll out for predictions, and I'll do the same for each playoff matchup throughout the MLS playoffs in terms of who I thought was going to win both those games. I'll quickly give you the results of those. So I asked who would win between Toronto and Philly, and there's 4 options. So you can pick TFC in regulation, TFC in extra time or penalties, Philly in regulation, Philly in extra time or penalties. So the results are pretty decisive for TFC. So the majority of the respondents do think TFC is going to win in regulation, 74%. 9% think they're going to win, but it's going to take some extra time. Only 12% think Philly's going to win outright during the regular 90, and 5%, so 17% in total, are picking Philly. So that does suggest to you that there is some people out there that are either taking the piss or probably depressed Toronto fans. There might be a few really overeager Philly fans in there, but if you read kind of the Philly press, not a lot of hope. Jonathan Tannenwald said there was no hope yesterday. A lot of the Philly people are kind of just having some fun with it as much as they can right now and hoping for the miracle. But
so you know what that means, right?
Pardon me, Kevin?
You know what that means?
It's
Philly will. They'll make a cup run. Like they'll go to the final or something.
Yeah. Look, they've been. I did the numbers a couple days ago in terms of form, and I mentioned these on the show. And what I found, just to repeat, if you didn't hear that, is that bad form doesn't necessarily eliminate you from possibly going deep. Now, that said, I didn't go deeper into this to see if truly terrible form, like no wins in 10, eliminated you, because I think that probably would. I just sort of looked at teams that were like underperforming heading into the playoffs and saw whether they were any more likely to be upset. I looked at top teams that were upset. That's how I did that. But Philadelphia is a team that's going in with no expectations and not a lot of hope. Of the 12 teams in this, they clearly are the one team that most people think probably don't belong. So that means it's even extra pressure from a TFC perspective, Kevin, because, if you lose tonight, everyone's just going to point to this as this team can't win, even though there's no connection to the past. They're going to connect it to the past, and that's something that I rally against. But at the same time, it's hard to dismiss a fan's perception of that if it happens. But we're talking worst case scenario here, and I honestly, if I logically look at this, I don't think they should lose.
Yeah.
They shouldn't. I mean, there's no should about this. I mean, it's MLS. I guess that's the only logical reason you could argue that Philly should win this game is because, well, sometimes crap happens in MLS.
Well, yeah, where the famous will park the bus and nothing, and they catch them on the counter that one time, and that one shot goes in, and Philadelphia goes on a great blocking every single shot to the net, and nothing goes in, and those are the type of things we could see happen. What's the likeliness of this happening? Very, very slim. I do feel Toronto, and when it comes to one-offs or home and away playoffs, cream rises to the top usually. So I do feel a Javinko or an Altidore, especially an inform Altidore, will have something to say about the result of the game tonight.
Yeah, well, what I've said all year is that if you're going to handicap MLS, to me, you pick the best player. The team with the best player is more likely to win the game because they can break it open. And this adage of defense wins championships, it's crap. I mean, it doesn't in MLS. It's the ability to score goals is what's going to win you a title. If you're a team that scores goals, you're more likely to win than a team that defends for its life, which is why I think Colorado might not repeat its performance of the regular season in the playoffs. It's why I'd be reluctant to suggest that they're going to go deep, although Colorado is particularly good on the defensive side of things, which does maybe give them a chance to buck that trend. Let's move away from the TFC game now, though, and focus on the other one real quickly before we start to set up our second half. The LA question, I asked the same question for LA RSL, and the results are similar, a little less dominant for LA, but LA is 64% they're going to win regulation, 16% extra time penalties, RSL 15% and 5. So you have 80-20 in terms of the people picking LA in that game.
The one thing that interests me there is what Charles mentioned on the show Monday, Duane, is what's going on behind the scenes in LA with Robbie Keane, with Gio and Gerard and the entire Galaxy crew. Can they overcome certain situations? And that's what's interesting to me to see if in a playoff now, does it just become about the performance and not necessarily where everybody will be next year?
Yeah, and you would think that the players would put that aside in a playoff because you would think that it would hurt if in fact they're kind of pouting down the stretch and trying to prove a point down the stretch by underperforming or being injured when they're not. You would think they'd put that aside in a playoff match because that would be counterproductive for them to not play, right? So if Robbie Keane was in fact doing that, as Charles suggested might be possible or suggested that's being whispered out there anyway, then you would think that he'd put that aside. And I'll tell you this about Robbie Keane, is that there has not been a DP in this league that has been more money than that guy over the course of his career. If he shows up and is ready to play, I mean, age is going to catch up to every man, but he still is a guy that you would think, I mean, he was playing international football this year, so he's hardly beyond it, right? He's a freak of nature that way. And if he shows up willing to play, then absolutely LA can perform. And you mentioned Donovan in this, and I think Donovan's role is going to be greatly reduced because his fitness is not going to be as high as others. But he's a player that has often throughout his career kind of floated in and out of a match and then suddenly, boom, taken over a match for 5 minutes and then gone back. And I don't think that goes away. That instinct doesn't go away. That instinct for goal doesn't go away. So you have to give LA the absolute favorite in this one anyway. Now, whether they can take down a Dallas or a Colorado even in a home and away is another story altogether. In terms of the RSL side of things, they're obviously going to sit back and try and counter. They're obviously going to look for the little guy Plata to try and create something. And look, we saw Plata early in his career here in Toronto, so we know him well. He is a creative player that can break down a team, but I don't think he's a player that can consistently do enough over 90 minutes to completely turn a game around outside of maybe one or two moments of magic. So I would kind of concur with our listeners in terms of who I would pick in these games. We picked them yesterday, but real quickly right now, did you see Toronto losing tonight?
No, I see Philly. I see Philly not even scoring a goal and Toronto 1-2.
Okay, and in terms of the LA RSL, do you think it's just going to be a Galaxy?
I see RSL LA maybe even going to extra time, but a 1-0 LA would seem fitting in the form of both teams and to reflect what's going on. I do feel like a 1-0 LA might be what's going to happen tonight.
I think it's. I'm going to go with 3-1 Toronto and 2-0 LA. All right, Kevin, for our next 20 minutes or so, we have an interview with Steven Sandor that I did last night with some breaking news. To set it up real quick, if you're not aware of this, the Ottawa Fury and the Tampa Bay Rowdies announced yesterday that they would be leaving NASL to go to the USL for the 2017 season. Now, in Tampa Bay's case, that's an interesting story, and it's one that I think that we're absolutely going to follow on this show in the days ahead. But for today, we're going to focus mostly on Ottawa because that story is a little more complicated, as Stephen will set up in a minute. There's some sanctioning issues with the CSA that need to be resolved. There are issues around whether they'll participate in the Voyageurs Cup by doing this. There's issues about what it means for the Canadian Premier League. There's a lot going on with that Fury move, and that's why I quickly got Stephen on the horn last night and had a conversation with him that we're going to run in a minute. When we come back from that interview, I'll share some of the stuff that I learned from talking to some of my CSA sources when this stuff was breaking yesterday, and Kevin and I will have a bit more of a chat about it there. Why don't we run a quick break and then come back to Steven Sandor.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Joining me on the line from Edmonton is Steven Sandor, a man we know well on this show and who knows the NASL's comings and goings pretty well as well. Of course, there was a big going today announced, or at least we think was announced, in the sense of the Ottawa Fury have announced that they're leaving to go to the USL. Now, Stephen, you've written before that might not necessarily be the case in the sense that they have to go through the CSA. They have to apply to go to the CSA in order to make that move to the USL. Have you heard of any change in what's happening there? Have they applied yet?
It's all the application is in, and December 4th is when the CSA board has to vote, as you know, on all sanctioning for major North American leagues. So MLS teams, NASL teams, USL teams, those sanctions are decided by the board as a whole. And December 4th, the board will be meeting to discuss the Ottawa Fury's future. Now, I expect it to get approved. I think most of us would expect that it's going to get approved. But I do think it's a bit disingenuous of the Fury and USL to not mention that today when they made the announcement, to say at least pending CSA approval, even if you're expecting that CSA approval. Now, look, I know they have to market for next year and sell tickets for next year, but I did find a little bit of that, hey, we're moving to USL next year, without the but at the end of it, a little bit misleading from the Fury and from the USL. I just think that they needed to address, and I think the fact that the CSA, I think, sent out that statement to pretty well everybody, that, hey, wait a sec, December 4th, we'll vote on it, is their sign of saying, don't put the cart before the horse, everyone. That, whether you expect that we're going to rubber stamp this or not, we still have our say, and our say is at the top of the whole pyramid of this thing. So I expect it to get approved. I don't expect it to go without some debate, though. I do think there will be a lot of talk about this and a lot of discussion about this, and I do expect that it might not be unanimous, but I do expect it to go through.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation, isn't it, that the CSA is in here? Because on one hand, they want to protect the philosophy behind their decision that they made a few years ago, in which they did not wish to sanction any further standalone clubs playing at that level, the USL, so that they could then encourage investors to go into local solutions, basically. Now, with the Canadian Premier League not yet there, that leaves the Ottawa Fury in a difficult position if they no longer feel that the NASL is a tenable position for them. So how do you think the Fury should have went about this, Stephen? Do you think they should have just kept it quiet and sort of worked quietly behind the scenes? Or
I actually don't think they needed to keep it quiet. I just think they needed to have the ... but at the end of their statement, saying that, we understand that CSA sanctioning will need to be achieved for this. I think the way this has been done was that the Fury sort of leaked this out to first get this out, to sort of trial balloon this with their fans to see how, would they stick with them? Would enough stick with them to make it work? I mean, obviously the cost in USL, because you don't do cross-continent travel, is much reduced. I mean, going to Toronto or Montreal for road trips is not going to clearly cost the Fury what it does to cost to go to Edmonton and Puerto Rico. But the fact is that a lot of these things do have to get decided still at the board level, and I do think that the ... but would have been nice.
Yeah, and the question, as you said, we all assume at this point in time that the CSA understands the importance of keeping a presence in the Ottawa market for the year that will occur next year, where we're still assuming that the Canadian Premier League is no earlier than 2018. So you're going to need some kind of presence there. But what happens if they were to say no? What happens if the amount of provisions put on an acceptance are so they're so high that makes it very difficult for the Fury to be competitive? What happens in that case?
Well, I think the question will be, I think the question that we're all going to have is how many Canadians are the Fury going to be required to field? Because the CSA, that's going to be part of their sanctioning decision, right? So, and the other part of the sanctioning decision will be, will they be allowed to play in the Voyageurs Cup? I mean, the Fury are already talking like they're playing in next year's tournament, but that's also to be decided based on the sanctioning.
Yeah,
if they're going to play in the tournament next year, because that's part and parcel of sanctioning as well on December 4th. So all of these things will be decided. But what I'm going to be interested to see is the CSA going to give Fury similar sort of CanCon requirements that they do with the affiliated USL teams, FC Montreal, TFC2, and the Whitecaps too. If the Fury will be, facing those kind of Canadian minimums that those teams have to face.
Well, I would imagine that if they're not provided with them, and for those that don't know, it is 50% of the roster must be Canadian, and 6 out of 11 starters averaged over the year. The CSA allows some kind of flexibility game to game, but the average has to go up to 6 to 11 over the course of the year, have to be Canadian, and they have to be eligible to play for the Canadian national team, which is an important wording in case they wanted to bring in some dual nationals that might have a connection to Canada but are capped elsewhere or ineligible. So that's there. I would suspect, Stephen, and wouldn't you agree, that if the CSA were to back off on the Fury on those provisions, that you would have certainly Vancouver making noise that they should back off across the board for the USL teams the MLS teams in USL.
I just don't think that they can make one rule for one USL team and have another rule for 3 others. I really can't see the Fury not having the same roster. I wouldn't call it restrictions, but roster guidelines placed on it as FC Montreal, Whitecaps 2, and TFC 2. I just don't see any other way for the CSA.
Yeah, exactly, because they'd have to back it off, and why would they? And the CSA could quite rightly argue that the Whitecaps went to the semifinals of the Western Conference this year, Whitecaps 2, and that would indicate that you can be competitive using the roster quotas that are out there. Let's turn our attention to the NASL side of this thing. Of course, the other part of the news today was the Tampa Bay Rowdies moving to the USL for next year. That in NASL circles is going to be the much harder hit, the much more dramatic hit. What does that say about the current status of the NASL?
I find that the situation with the Rowdies is a little bit interesting because Bill Edwards is a larger-than-life owner. And I think that the USL might find with Bill Edwards that he does some interesting things. And I think there might be some people in the NASL who aren't sad to see him go. Okay. Bill Edwards is the same guy who fired Thomas Rongen about 3 months after he hired him, saying that, I don't believe in 5-year plans. I believe in 1-year plans. Mm-hmm. He was the guy that put up the video of referee decisions this year, claiming some kind of conspiracy against the Rowdies. So this is a guy that has always been loud and blustery, and he's been interesting since he's taken over the Rowdies in 2013.
Fair enough. So you're suggesting then that maybe they won't necessarily see this as a bad thing that he's gone, but the stability of the league has to be a concern for those that have teams in this league, for fans out there of FC Edmonton, the team that you know well. What should those fans be thinking today? Should they be worried about the stability of this league, even the possibility that this league may be gone for next year?
Look, I think if you've been around Division 2 or Division 3 in North America for any length of time, you're worried about your league every single day of the year that you're alive. That just comes part and parcel of the territory. Does the worry get more serious now? I don't know. I think at some point, what NASL does the next year in terms of bringing in new teams, the kind of owners it brings in, I think some of the old guard were scared by the big spending types of Miami FC that were brought in. But it looks like those are the kind of owners that NASL is going after. It looks like San Francisco Delta is going to be the same way. It looks like possibly Chicago will be the same way. So what are you going to do? That's the kind of the league the NASL wants to be. So be it. But worried? We're always worried.
Yeah. As someone close to the Eddies up there, do you anticipate that their commitment to NASL remains as strong as ever? Obviously, the owner there has a stake in that league. So, do you feel that there's any changes, any possibility of movement?
Yeah, the rumor mills are going this morning that Edmonton might be going to USL. So I had to call Tom Pfaff, and he actually laughed when I asked him that question. I said, "You wouldn't be moving to USL." He goes, "Zero chance." He goes, "Not interested at all." So that was pretty well the answer there. This team is quite loyal to NASL and the NASL model. So this is, I think that right now, FC Edmonton still feels very strongly and they believe very strongly in the NASL model. And, honestly, I talk to them and they're not bothered by how much money Miami and New York Cosmos spend. And they say that, look, we're making the playoffs. We're a playoff team. Miami's not in the playoffs. That with good coaching and with good roster decisions, you can succeed in this league and you can beat the big spenders at their own game, and that there is room for different types of approaches in this league. But they do like the laissez-faire attitude that NASL provides. And yes, it's much more expensive to play in NASL than it is in USL. But at the same time, there's, you can argue about the level of play, the level of prestige. I don't know. That would be up to the fans. I mean, we can say that in Ottawa and Tampa. When we see what their attendances are like next year, if the attendances are fine, then, good on them. If they see notable reductions in attendance, then you can say, hey, that does mean something to some of the fans. So that's for next year, the debate. But for Edmonton, it's stay the course and go ahead.
Let me just we'll end it with this, Stephen, because I know you're fighting. Your voice is fighting a little bit there, so we'll let you go and appreciate your time. But if you had to put had your time machine up there and you were to flash forward, say 3 years, do you anticipate that? Where do you anticipate the Eddies will be playing, and where do you anticipate the Fury will be playing, say 3 years from now? Do you think they'll be in their respective places they are, or some other solution that might be out there?
Well, 3 years from now, my understanding is. Now, unless the Fury got some kind of waiver that it's a 3-year commitment to play in the USL, NASL doesn't have that kind of commitment. It's year to year. So if the Fury are in the same way on a normal commitment, you'd be in until 2019 for sure. But I don't know if that was waived because of a Canadian Premier League. I would like to think that the Fury might find their way to a Canadian league. I just don't know if the people of Ottawa. And no offense, and I don't live in Ottawa, so I shouldn't speak for the people of Ottawa. But I don't know how the appetite to see like FC Montreal 2 or TFC 2 and the two teams, in terms of Edmonton where they'll be. I'm gonna tell you one thing for sure, Duane, that if the crowds don't improve in Edmonton, no matter what league they play in, there ain't gonna be 3 years from now. I'll tell you where they won't be playing, and that's anywhere. The fact is that Edmonton's problem still is an attendance issue and a sponsorship issue, and of course one sort of begats the other. If you have more people coming out to games, more sponsors are interested in sponsoring your team, and vice versa. So more people need to come out to the stadium to support this team, and that to me still is the biggest issue facing FC Edmonton right now, is the fact that this team put together the best season they've ever put together. Maybe TFC's on a great run. I don't want to discount that, but you talk about remarkable seasons in Canadian sport or in Canadian soccer this year. FC Edmonton season would have to go right up there. This has been a great year for the Eddies, and yet their attendance has been down. So, I think the Eddies have a much bigger problem than what league that they play in. And honestly, what league would they play in? I mean, let's say they hypothetically went to USL, you would argue that they would play probably in division with Vancouver, Portland, Seattle. So they have the two teams. And guess what? Edmonton's far enough from those places. You ain't busing there either. Mm-hmm. Like Edmonton is far enough away from every place else in North America that there is no busing. There is no cutting down travel costs. Like, it's still going to be extremely expensive for Edmonton to travel in USL Like, it would be like, okay, well, there's a team in Colorado. That's Denver. That's 2.5 hour flight, 2-hour flight. And there's a team in Portland, and that's, 12 hours, 13 hours by bus, or, an hour and a half flight. And you get into those situations. Edmonton will always have this issue because of how isolated it is as a city. It's a northern city. It's the northernmost major city in North America, and northernmost by a lot. Mm-hmm. And so it's never an easy game for them to play. So they, honestly, the travel is always going to be a huge issue for them, no matter what league they play.
They could potentially bust to, say, Saskatoon and Calgary if there were ever something to evolve in those cities, but that would probably be the only solution you could potentially see down the line there. Is there any softening on the Canadian Premier League out there, or is it still NASL?
Not right now, no. There still hasn't been any softening on the fast part on it. Again, it's still very much an NASL NASL or bust kind of attitude with the team. I just don't see them being very excited about the business plan that they've seen. I mean, they've certainly been talked to, but I don't think that they're very excited about the business plan going forward for what they see for this for the Canadian Premier League, which either here or there. I mean, I have to cover this, and I have to be as objective as possible, because I would be lying to say that I don't want to see Canadian Premier League succeed, because I do want to see Canadian Premier League succeed. So, they're still holding out hope that there'll be a Calgary NASL team one day. I mean, they own a lot of trademarks in the anticipation that a Calgary team would come. Edmonton's even bought a lot of the Calgary Boomers trademarks all belong to FC Edmonton. And the idea if an NASL team came, that they would give them the trademark, give them the name, because FC Edmonton bought up a lot of the historic Calgary soccer names, so that if someone came in, maybe one day it might be like an Anschutz situation. NASL decides maybe the best thing is if someone owns more than one team, and like in the old MLS days, and that maybe that's the way. Not that I think that Tom Pfaff would want another soccer team, but I think that there's that maybe that could be something down the road. But I mean, they still hold out hope that there could be another Canadian team NASL. I don't see it on the horizon right now, not with the dollar the way it's at, not with talking Canadian Premier League. I think that's a few years down the road, and you would have to have, one of those renegade owner types that fits into that NASL model of being okay with spending a lot of money right up front. And clearly, like, spending that kind of money was not something that Bill Edwards and not something the OSCG wasn't comfortable with anymore. And that's fine. And I think the NASL's response today was fine with that too, saying that they're free to go. And we've always been a league that's been, our clubs can look after themselves. And, there was no harsh words from the NASL, and I think that was the right way to handle it. I think the NASL's been much better the last couple of months in terms of being more measured and less militant about their responses to these things. And I think they've learned some lessons about that.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, Steve, we will let you go now, because I know you're struggling with the voice there, and this is obviously a story that's going to be moving, and certainly after December 4th, there'll be a lot to talk about there. So thanks again for your time today, Steve.
I'll tell you, Duane, that the FC Edmonton game that I had to do on Sunday was the worst that I've had to deal, because I was so sick, and I basically did it with the lozenges, like Ricola lozenges, jammed in my cheek the whole game, so I wouldn't cough up all over the microphone.
Oh dear. Well, you're a professional that way then. So hopefully you'll be well by the time you call that playoff game, and we're all
professional tip. Ricolas tucked into your cheek like a squirrel.
There you go. Just don't when they make sure that you don't have the big puffy cheeks when they're doing a one-on-one when they're doing a one shot on you or something. All right, Steven, thanks again.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And welcome back, and thanks again for Stephen taking some time last night. A little under the weather there, as you could hear in his voice, and he's a trooper that way. But a lot to unpack there, Kevin, and I think that we're going to have to unpack it in the days ahead.
Yeah.
Certainly the other angle, and originally when I did that interview last night, the intention was to maybe do a special show on it and get an Ottawa voice in there as well. Unfortunately, the timing just didn't work out to get someone that's a little closer to the Ottawa scene in terms of particularly on the fan side of things, because I know that they have a lot of concerns from talking to a few of them last night about what this move means to the quality of soccer that they're going to see on display. I have opinions on the quality difference between NASL and USL that not everyone shares, and that is simply that I don't think the quality gap is going to be all that noticeable to the average fan, but certainly that is something that a lot of people are concerned about, Kevin.
Well, yeah, but there's going to be a difference as well between teams to teams. Because now those two quote-unquote standalone teams joining USL makes the USL a different landscape heading into 2017 than it is in 2016. But with the new joining forces of Reno and Nashville in the upcoming season in USL, it'll be very interesting because now you're adding a big quote-unquote either standalone or just affiliate, but with their own branding. So no, Ottawa Fury it's interesting, just namesake and everything, how that will go forward. You would think that it would be already resolved, the copyrights with the NASL figuring the name and all of those type of things heading into the USL now. So we'll see all the ramifications. The coach is that I think Dalglish has been quoted saying that he will stay today or yesterday. I'm not sure. Well, there's that aspect to it. The players as well. Some players must be on the contract, but in that contract, it's an NSL contract. Will that be applicable to? So there's a lot of questions still need to be answered in Ottawa's decision to join the USL, and same for Tampa Bay Rowdies as well. New owner a few years ago. You have the stadium issues, and they were able to keep, and you have the infrastructures. They do have a very good one, especially for a USL level type of team. So no, it's interesting on a lot of different facets of a soccer club.
Yeah, look, they're different stories, Tampa Bay and Ottawa. And as I said, we will explore Tampa Bay in the days ahead. But really, they're looking up by going to USL. They're doing what San Antonio did to try and set themselves up to develop a better relationship with Major League Soccer to potentially maybe move there one day, particularly when you look at the Miami situation and it not really looking close to resolution. Then, you kind of have Tampa Bay in your back pocket if you're Major League Soccer for a second Florida team. They like having those regional rivals, right? So that might be Tampa Bay's thinking. But Ottawa's thinking, I think it's pretty clearly about the pocketbook. It's about trying to reduce costs, reduce travel costs, to try and keep the brand in the market, so on and so forth. Look, the other side of it, of course, and you mentioned a lot of things have to be resolved. Well, the most important thing that has to be resolved is December 4th, and that's that vote to fully sanction this. And this is where we're kind of getting the impression that the Fury aren't making friends in the CSA with the way that they're approaching this. They're putting kind of external pressure on the CSA to allow them to go into a league that the CSA didn't really want more teams going into. So now that you're stuck between that rock and a hard place if you're the CSA, because the Canadian Premier League isn't ready to start next year. So what do? Do you just allow this team to fizzle and die, and that's going to be a reputation that's going to be hard to overcome in the Ottawa market for anyone trying to start that next team? Or do you make some kind of arrangement with them to allow them to continue? Now, I was told yesterday that the Fury were keeping the CSA informed of what was going on, so they're not completely in the dark, and that this will likely pass on December 4th, but with the same type of quotas that are expected out of the three other teams in USL. And that is, of course, the 50% roster requirement for Canadian players that are eligible for Canadian national team play, and the 6 of 11 starters on average over the course of the season that have to be Canadian men's national team eligible as well, Kevin. So, look, it's complicated in the sense that the CSA wants to encourage investment in domestic solutions. But if it's not there yet, then what do you do if you're the Fury? And it's hard to argue that they aren't doing what's right for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other issue that I'm wondering is the academy. Remember almost a month ago now, I would say, the academy, they were reported the academy was shutting down. So it's going to be interesting to see if they just restart the whole thing or how that unfolds.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the other rumors at Ottawa is that they maybe aren't as interested in doing stuff like that as maybe we'd like them to be. So I would anticipate that because USL doesn't require an academy, that they won't necessarily go that route any further. There has been some speculation amongst certain people within the Ontario soccer community that I run with. And to be clear, this isn't coming from the top or anything official, but I have heard the possibility of League One moving that direction. So you might see a new kind of opportunity for young players in the Ottawa region emerge in the days ahead, and we'll watch that carefully. But in terms of the Fury Academy, I suspect it's probably not going to be there for a couple of years. The last point on this, we're running out of time for today, but the last point on this is as it relates to the Canadian Premier League. And there was a quote today in the Ottawa Sun where John Pugh, the owner of the Fury, or well, one of the owners, the guy that's generally running that show, said that, and he used a turn of phrase that has a lot of Canadian, hardcore Canadian soccer fans that want the Premier League to get going sooner rather than later, has them worried. And that's that he said that the Canadian Premier League was, quote unquote, on the back burner for now. This has a lot of people speculating that the reports that Anthony's making, that I've made in the past, that this is moving along at a pace that everyone expects, may be exaggerated. It's hard to argue against that kind of emotional reaction to a statement like that. And I do. And as I said yesterday to one of my CSA sources, I said, the CSA needs to get in front of this, is what I said to them. And it's getting frustrating because what's going to happen is that people are going to hear this move. They're going to see Ottawa going to that, and they're going to immediately assume that the Canadian Premier League either isn't happening or isn't happening for a long time. And my source said, I agree. But then he followed up to say, but there is a lot of things happening right now that just doesn't allow them to make any further concrete statements, that there's a lot of basically nuts and bolts that have to be negotiated still. That are smaller, that aren't major things, like they aren't the stuff that's going to, if it, it's not stuff that's required to get it going, like it's going, but they still need to get the details out in terms of the exact launch and things like that, so they can't make announcements just yet. But it is unfortunate, and I do understand people's reaction if they think that maybe this isn't happening to 2020 or 2021 or maybe never because of this kind of announcement from Ottawa. So lots of stuff going on and a lot that we could talk about in the days ahead. Kevin, any final thoughts?
Well, tonight, MLS playoffs, 7:30 Toronto, Philadelphia, and 10:30 Eastern, LA, RSL. I'll be riveted to my screen to see who gets a ticket to play New York or to play Colorado in the next round.
Exactly. And I will be at BMO Field later on tonight. And before that, I will be at Opera Bob's on College in Ossington, Dundas and Ossington, to watch the
Derby.
Yeah.
In the EFL Cup, or better known as the League Cup. Today, Chelsea versus West Ham as well.
All right. And quickly, as a quick note, if you get Sirius FM, you can listen to me on United States of Soccer in 22 minutes. So I best get going to prepare for that. So I'll let you, as always, Kevin, say goodbye.
Tomorrow, 11 a.m. live for Soccer Today. And until then, have a great MLS Cup playoffs. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.